First of all, thanks, Josh, for saying yes to my podcast request, and welcome to Creator Heist.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you. As you know, I'm a big fan of your newsletter, and I know we've connected over. It's probably been a few years now, at least, that we've
yeah,
sort of connected online and by email. So it's cool to have a chance to chat with you.
I was going to say that I was looking back through like how our relationship went, and I think you were one of the first like creators I followed on Twitter back in 2020, which was when
Wow.
I started actually being more active in this creator space and on Twitter. And you were one of the first ones I followed, and at the same time, one of the first newsletters in the space that I subscribed to. I think you were at around 10K subscribers, something like that, back then, or
Mm.
maybe a bit more. But it was like as you are now, which is like twice, not twice, like at least 4 times as big, right? So
Yeah.
that's my first memory of you, is that just like that first like creator guy that I met on this side of Twitter. So
Nice.
it's cool to have you on. So basically, I want to start, like, I want to keep this like very tactical for people who listen to us. um so basically, I want to start with the audience growth and content creation, because
Mhm.
that's one of the things that I feel that you do really really well. And one thing I noticed about you, and basically your newsletter, and most of your most popular Twitter posts and everything, they are like based on curation, right? Like content curation more than content creation, in a way. I was looking at your top Twitter posts, and it was like 10 lessons I learned from like landing pages, like analyzing landing pages from these guys,
Mhm.
or like these are the top 10 Twitter tips I would do from these guys. So all of this curation, and your newsletter basically is just a recap of like super interesting links that you find around, like all of that. So so for someone starting out, why
Mhm.
should they also contemplate like curation instead of just going out and try to be like original with their content?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and the way I think about it, both in whether it's newsletter or Twitter or social, whatever you're, even blog posts, like whatever you're going to do,
Mm,
is I sort of see three options when it comes to content creation, right? So one is you're just doing original stuff. The other is you're just doing curated stuff, and then the
mm,
third is hybrid, right? Which is you're doing some original and some curated. I personally am a huge believer and proponent in hybrid for almost everyone in whatever you're going to do. And I'll explain the reasons why. If you only do original stuff is super valuable. Um, but there's, you can only create so much original stuff so
mm,
quickly, right? So by adding curation, you're able to increase the value of, let's just talk newsletter, or Twitter or whatever, right? By adding
yeah,
curation, you're able to increase the amount of value you give people without increasing significantly the amount of time that it takes you to create that value, right? So
yeah,
that's a huge difference. On the flip side, if you have people who go the other way where they're only curating, they're not doing any original stuff, that can be valuable, but at the end of the day, it's the original stuff. And some of this depends on what your ultimate goals are, but it's
mhm,
the original stuff that leads people to hire you, buy from you. It's the original stuff that makes your newsletter, your Twitter account unique, right? That,
mm,
yes, curation is valuable and is important, but you see this all the time. You see a million newsletters that are just curated, and yeah, you can be really good at it and you can be better than most. But if it's only curated, there's a cap on sort of the level to which your audience connects with you, right?
yeah,
So I think hybrid really gives you the best of both worlds. And I don't think it's that hard, because most people that are leaning into original stuff, they're already consuming all sorts of things. So
mm,
to go that extra step, and so I like, well, I'm going to share the things that I found interesting that I learned from in addition to my original stuff, isn't actually that hard. Like, I don't actually spend any time, I don't set aside any time to go, quote unquote, look for stuff for my newsletter or to curate. It's just when I
yeah,
come across something that's interesting or valuable, I paste the link into a list, and then when I go to write my newsletter, I just look at what I found, right? So, and it's also just going back to sort of your question, you know, it's interesting because I think sometimes when you look at just sort of like, well, what's the most quote unquote popular in my tweets, or what's
mhm,
gone the most viral or whatever, it can be misleading, right? Because so for example, it might seem like curated stuff performs better for me than original stuff, but that's just based on sort of Twitter reach and algorithm, right? If you tag a
Yeah.
bunch of people in a post and those people share it, that's going to have
Yeah.
more reach than a thing that doesn't, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it actually got me more followers. It doesn't actually mean that it got me more customers or more clients or any of that stuff. So I would argue that my original stuff is actually a bigger audience growth driver than the curated stuff. But the curated stuff helps, right? So like my newsletter, you know, when I share my newsletter, there's always, you know, if I share five main links in a Sunday newsletter, at least one of those is going to be something original for me. And the other four will probably be curated. My newsletter is effective. If it was just 5 curated things, I don't think it would be as successful. And if it was just the one original thing, I don't think it would be as successful. Like I really think that the hybrid approach is the best way to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree, because actually now that I think about it, I kind of do the same with my newsletter too, with the Steel Club, because it's basically, I do take things here and there, like tactics that others are using, but I add like my own commentary, my own thing, how I would do it for me. So I think that it's a very interesting mix, you know, because as you say, like curators is like one thing, but you don't have like any competitive advantage, any moat. It's just like anyone can be like a recap of can do a recap of links, but not that many people can do a recap and then add something original on top of that. So I think that's a really interesting point. Definitely.
The other thing too, depending, you know, what kind of person you are, that, you know, the curation, especially when you're starting out, can be a forcing function for you to learn. So it forces you to go find stuff to share. And what's interesting is consuming that stuff that you're going to curate, consuming and then summarizing and whatever, is also learning and fueling your original content. Because you may go out there and you may see like, wow, I found, you know, all these people are saying that this is the way to do Twitter or whatever, but I don't think so. And it might inspire you to then create your own sort of original piece, right? So the curation piece actually, you know, there's a very symbiotic relationship, I think, between the two, right? That the curation actually helps improve your original content. The original content adds value to the curated content, and they work really well together.
Yeah, totally agree. You mentioned that you don't do like any super like deep research or anything like that to find the things. It's just like whatever you come up with when you are like on Twitter or LinkedIn, on reading other newsletters, stuff like that. I'm curious too, because I saw that you have been doing this more recently. I think this is like a new thing that you are doing, like a new tactic, if we want to call it that. And is that you do a post every week where you are like, you know, opportunity. I will plug a few of the links that you put here on my newsletter. Your reply with you know, like a short description and a link. What was the reason for doing that? Is it because you wanted people to like, you know, I feel lazy, I don't want to do, you know, I just want like the links on me? Or is it also like a tactic that you're using consciously to like, I know that this will drive a bit of reach, a bit of engagement, and also like will spread the word about my newsletter? I'm just curious about.
So like most things, it sort of started as just kind of random one-off, no huge strategy behind it. And then when I saw that it worked really well, I was like, oh, let me try it again. And now it's kind of become a regular thing. And the original sort of impetus for it was I saw ads in my newsletter. And there would be some weeks where there would be two things. So one, there would be some weeks where maybe it wasn't sold out. And in those weeks, I would a lot of times just sort of pick someone I know or wanted to, you know, shine a light on or that kind of thing. Right. I didn't have to, but I figured, well, I have the space. Like, why don't I just sort of throw it in there? Sometimes I would use it for cross promotions or you know, whatever it was. And so then one week, I don't know, maybe it was a couple months ago, something like that. I was like, well, you know, instead of me just randomly picking someone I know or whatever, you know, let me see, you know, it's another way to sort of give back, right, to my audience. And, you know, I was like, all right, well, let me just put it out there. And I posted this tweet and it said opportunity. And, you know, do you want to, what's interesting is I didn't call it, I don't think I said like, oh, I have an ad available. Like, I think I just said, if you'd like to be featured in my newsletter, it goes to 40,000 creators. Like, just reply and let me know what you want to share, and give me like 150 characters or whatever. I forget what the number is, what it would be. And so predictably, like, who doesn't want, I mean, it's great engagement bait, right? So who doesn't?
Yeah,
so all these people were replying and saying, "Here's my link and here's my thing," and so it got a lot of reach. It was also, I realized this sort of after the fact as I was thinking about it. It's subtle promotion for my newsletter, because everyone that sees that is like, oh, he has a newsletter, and so it would get more subscribers, and they would want to see, oh, am I going to get featured, whatever. And it worked really well. So then I did it again the following week. And then I started realizing, like, well, even if my ads are sold out, at least in the Sunday issue, like, I can add another line. I can add another ad. Like, it's not a big deal for me to sort of add a line. So I was like, oh, I might as well do this. And so basically I realized, like, oh, this is a win-win. Like, it's a win for my audience. It's a win for me. Like, it's simple. It doesn't take a lot of time or effort or anything like that. And then as I went, I started to learn and think about and slightly tweak all these things. So then I realized after a few times, I started adding a line that was like, if you retweet this, doesn't guarantee you're going to get picked, but it doesn't hurt your chances. Right. So just like so now you had people retweeting it, right? Which is expanding the reach even more. And as I go through it, I, as far as how I choose who to feature, obviously I'm looking for things that are going to be applicable and valuable to my audience. Like, I want it to be good stuff. I do consider, is this someone I have some relationship with, I'm used to seeing them in my replies. Not just maybe they retweet that, but like they're, connected to me, or some random person who has no idea who I am and just happened to see it. I try to each week sort of pick a balance of stuff, right? So it's like, well, this person's promoting a podcast thing, and this person's promoting a landing page builder, and this person has an app or whatever. So try to get a mix, so it's not just like, whatever. For the most part, I try to pick different people. So sort of different people get a shot at it. And I just realized, like I said, it's a win-win. It worked really well. And so now it's become pretty much a weekly thing that I did. And what's really interesting is I saw someone the other day doing it for their newsletter. They were like, oh, I'm going to steal this from from Josh Spector. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I retweeted that, because again, like, I don't think they have a huge newsletter, but I was like, oh, so I think it's now a thing that I'm doing regularly. But I'm also realizing, like, there's all sorts of potential here for all sorts of different stuff. And the other thing that I like about it, and I don't have, this is just sort of anecdotal, but my assumption is, now that those posts are all reaching a decent amount of people, even if, it's now created a thing where even if I'm not featuring them in my newsletter, even if they don't get chosen, people are probably scrolling through and looking at everybody's stuff. So the tweet itself has now become sort of a promotional vehicle, which is really cool.
I was going to say, like, the chances to get features are not that big, because obviously there is like 50, 60, 70 people like replying to this tweet. But it's useful because me, whenever I see one of these tweets, I do like look into it, because maybe I get something for my newsletter, or find out like an interesting tool or whatever. So I think it's like a public service that you are doing. I think it's super cool. And honestly,
and it also, by the way, I would say it also, for me, surfaces, stuff that I didn't know exists, right? Like stuff that I find out there. The one thing I will say, and I won't say that I never do this, but I tend to skew to picking stuff that's free. So like, there's some people that are like, promoting their coaching service, and it's like, nobody knows who you are. They're probably not gonna do that. So free or very, inexpensive, is typically what I choose, because I think it's both better for the audience and better for the person. Like, they're more likely to get traction. It's unlikely someone's going to hire you that has no context for who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. I mean, I think I will steal it for me. So maybe you will see like one
Nice.
tweet like that, because I also have like a small link section on the newsletter. So it's like obviously useful to have these
Yeah.
all of these type of links or whatever.
Well, and I'll add one other thing about that, which I think is not specific to this. It's actually an example of a sort of bigger content creation and promotion thing that I believe in. It's interesting, like when you talked about it, you said you do these opportunity tweets.
Mm-hmm.
And the repetition, the packaging of the tweet, right? Those are the only, it's always the little siren emoji, opportunity,
Yeah.
siren emoji, and then the thing. And it's a great example of, I could do the exact same thing, not have that, and it would just look like other tweets. Like, it's really interesting that the way you first started talking about them was not like, oh, you give away. You said you do these opportunity tweets,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
That's
it's a
true.
perfect example of, and not just with sort of these giving away ads or any of that, but like packaging up your content is super important. And I think so many people overlook it, right? And that's a really easy way to package it, right? People see that siren and that opportunity in their feed in my post, and they've now come to know, oh, that's the thing where he's giving away the stuff, even without reading it. And I did it last week, and I'm going to do it again this week, and and whatever. And so
Yeah.
I think that's another small, like, little thing, but I think it's a big thing that can be applied to sort of all sorts of stuff that you do, right? How do you package up and present something in a way that's sort of consistent and repetitive, so that people start to know what that thing is without even reading it?
Yeah, you have created like some sort of a routine or like a ritual with your audience. You know that
Mhm.
on, I don't know if you do it in the exact same day, but they know that on Thursdays, more or less like around 9 a.m., like Josh
Mhm.
posts, he does this tweet, and I need to be there to plug my thing, because I know that I get, so it creates like
Right.
this interesting like in the loop. So I think that's super cool. Speaking of which, you do another thing which I think is really interesting. Like, there is like this relationship between social media and newsletters, and how one fits into the other. So you do this thing that, and you mentioned it before when you mentioned how your newsletter works, is that you put your content, like maybe a thread that you did, or like LinkedIn post or something, on your newsletter, which creates an interesting thing, because it drives people to like the post.
Mhm.
It probably, some of them like, some of them comment on it, which also creates people of their neighbor finding your tweet on the social platform, and then probably likely going back to your newsletter. So
Yep.
is that also, I mean, I understand it is, but is that also like something intentional that you do, right? Because
Yeah.
it creates this nice loop between platforms.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely intentional. And I think it's really at its core. It's really interesting because pretty much everybody tries to use social to grow their newsletter, right?
Hmm.
They're promoting it, they go here, whatever. But almost nobody uses their newsletter to promote their social.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when they do it, the few who do it, what they typically do is they have something buried at the bottom that's like, follow me on Twitter. Even if they mention it in the content of the post, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram, blah, blah, blah. Like, that is nobody's doing that for the most part. They're
Yeah.
not
No.
doing it, right?
No.
Or they will, embed tweets within the newsletter, right?
Yeah.
Also, nice idea in theory, bad execution, right? Because you're just there's no reason for them to go there. So what I think the huge opportunity that people are missing is, if you use the newsletter to actually link to individual social posts, link to content. Don't say, go follow my Twitter account. Don't send them to your profile. Send them to an individual post, the same way you would a blog post, an article, or whatever. All sorts of, and especially if you write the copy and write the link in a way that is going to get them there, like tease it, don't just say like, go check out my latest tweet, like go, actually sort of treat it like the way you would a blog post or whatever. You're selling the link click. It unlocks all sorts of good things, right? So the first thing is it's basically an algorithm breaker, because if you have a newsletter, even if your newsletter is not huge, let's say, you're able to get 50 clicks on something, right? You're sending 50 people to an individual tweet or piece of content. And depending what your audience is, like, most, there probably aren't 50 people that are seeing it. You're also sending 50 people who clicked because they're interested in that specific thing. They're on your newsletter. They're way more likely to engage with that stuff. If they're in the social, if they're on the social platform looking at your tweet, it's easier for them to like it. It's easier for them to share it. It's easier for them to reply to it. It's easier for them to follow you. Totally different, right? It's going to boost it in the algorithm because now Twitter's like, well, what's going on? Like, this is getting a lot of attention from elsewhere. This is getting passed around, right? Again, I don't know exactly how the algorithm works, but I'm pretty sure that's a good signal on any of these platforms. So that is a super powerful, it's the best way, it's an easy way to use your newsletter to grow your social channels, as opposed to just using your social channels to grow your newsletter. And so I now will, for the most part, almost every issue of my newsletter is going to have at least one link to some social post. It's just so much more, it's so much more effective. And I can see it, right? Because I can see, and I might link to a social post that, my newsletter might come out on Sunday with a link to a LinkedIn post that I posted 4 days ago. And all of a sudden that post is getting likes and comments and all this stuff. And I know what's happening, and it's people who didn't see it. So I think that is, if you have a newsletter and if you have social, you should absolutely be doing that in almost every issue.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's like a super smart way. And as you said, like not that many people do like the reverse path of like growing the newsletter via doing this, So I think it's super interesting and something that's super easy to leverage actually. As you said, you just need to like work a bit on the copy and redirect them to like a specific piece of content, not like follow me on Twitter, which as you said, like no one does that when you put it on your newsletter.
No. So, and you can do, and again, once you get in that mindset, you can get creative and do all sorts of stuff with it, right? So, for example, like a lot of people, sometimes they'll ask a question in their newsletter trying to get replies, and that's valuable, like getting people to reply to the email, whatever. But you could just as easily post that question on Twitter, link to the tweet, and have people reply there, right? It depends on your interests and goals, but as opposed to 20 people replying to my newsletter in my inbox, now all those replies are going on that tweet, and it's sparking other things, and everyone can see them. And by the way, you could go a step further, where the following issue of your newsletter, you link back to the tweet again, and go look at all the replies that, look at what everyone said, right? So you can really start to sort of build these blocks and continue to grow it in that way.
That's a good one. I remember someone who did this a lot was Harry Drive from Marketing Examples. So he did like he actually launched the thread and the newsletter more or less at the same time. And he asked people like, if you enjoy the newsletter, please go to Twitter and engage with the thread, because this will help me, And people did that. And then all the threads went viral, which, increases the subscribers that go in the newsletter. So it's like another smart way to do it. But I remember I read somewhere, probably on Chanel's newsletter, in Growth in Reverse, that he did that thing of like posting almost at the same time and then redirecting people to social so they engage with the content and push it on the algorithm. So
I mean, that's super smart. I don't do it. I send my email at like 6 a.m. and I'm not waking up to post
that's next level,
and whatever. But it is really smart, right? Like if I were to do that and you were to get, several hundred people to a thing that was just posted, I have to imagine that would have a big impact on the algorithms.
Yeah, totally. I also wanted to talk about and this is the last thing I want to talk about around content creation and audience growth, about like your build a content library type of philosophy. You made like a few posts around this and it was super cool, because basically what you explained was something that you just need to pick like one target audience, one specific like goal or transformation that they want to make, like from A to B, and then just understand 30 things that they need to get there. And then from those 30 things, you need to ask like how to do it, why they do it, and how others do it for each specific thing, which actually gives you like 30 for 3 is like 90 pieces of content. So that to me was like, wow, that's actually super simple, easy content creation framework, actually super simple. You don't need, it's not like super complex or anything, but at the same time, it gives you content for 90 days, which then you can actually take again and repeat. So
Yep.
is that something that you actually do? I understand you do it. I mean, maybe not at the full extent of it, but
It's no, definitely not at the full extent. And it's funny because as you're talking about it in my mind, I'm going like, God, I really need to do that.
exactly.
I need to listen to myself. So I think I do it intuitively in pieces, right? I have not sat down and gone, okay, these are the 90 thing, right? Like, and I probably should, because again, like I said, you were saying it and I was like, oh my God, that's right, I should do that.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
But yeah, it's pretty good. And I think the other part of that concept was that essentially, so that framework allows you to come up with sort of 90 pieces of content, right? It gives you sort of guideline for 90 pieces of content. But the idea is you're ultimately looking for 90 sort of home runs, right? So what happens is, so let's say you do that and you go through and you're like, here's my 90 pieces of content, and you post them and you look at how over the course of 3 months or whatever, and you look at how they're performing, right? And maybe, I don't know, let's say 30 of the 90 work really well, right? You go, okay, the next 90 days, I have those 30. And now with the same sort of framework, right? So like, it was how to, this thing that was how to do this thing. Well, that didn't work. It was okay, but it wasn't a home run. Well, I'm going to try a different one of that, right? And that your goal is you're iterating till you get to a point in theory where you have 90 home run posts that you're just, and you could be done. Like, you don't have to be done. You can always add to it. But theoretically, you would every day have a piece of content that you're going to put out that you haven't posted in 3 months that is a winner. Because by the way, like I'm a big on repurposing content anyway and reposting and stuff. If it works once, it's going to work again. 3 months is a random sort of window, but I think that's plenty of time. So I do a version of that now. Like, so each week I go through and I go, okay, what of the things that I posted were what I call sort of a home run, right? And those I just map out like, okay, like this was a hit. I'm using this again 3 months from now and whatever, right? And that idea, and that's part of why I called it a content library, was like that you're building this library of hits. And over time, you should have enough that decreases this idea that you're going to have to forever be creating new content all the time. It's a really different mindset, right? It's a different mindset to go, what I'm doing when I post something is I'm mining for hits, right? That's the point of the new stuff. And I'm trying to find and collect enough hits, enough quote unquote books in my library, right? That I'll get to a point where, as you go, you have fewer and fewer needs to sort of create new content. And that all of this is going to work. You can imagine if you actually had 90 guaranteed hit pieces of content, you can imagine how much your audience would grow and all of that when every day, everything you're putting out is proven winners, right? Like it's a whole other thing. And I think it's a really, it's a totally different mindset than what most people do with content, which is forever new stuff, forever like, I'm just, more. It's like, no, I'm just trying to find the things that work and collect them and reuse them. And when you also think about it in that mindset, you think about the value of a single post, a single tweet, a single concept that is a hit in this universe is insanely valuable beyond, because you're going to be able to reuse it forever. You're going to be able to probably adapt. You're going to look and go, okay, well, why did this hit? Maybe I should do more on that topic. Maybe I should do more in that format, whatever it is. If even 1 out of 25 posts was a hit, that's super, super valuable, right? And so I think that idea of the whole point of me doing any of this is I'm just looking for the hits. Changes, I think, how you think about creating content, how you measure the value, how you feel even about the stuff that doesn't work, right? Oh, okay, that piece of content flopped. Who cares? The other thing too that I've started doing recently, and I haven't really talked about this yet. I just started it a few weeks ago, but I'm feeling very bullish about it. I'm starting to, I share a lot of this stuff on multiple platforms. I use Twitter and LinkedIn in my newsletter, basically. But what I've started to do is get a little more organized with sort of the path. So what I'm doing lately, and I still do some original stuff that I'll just come up with a tweet or whatever. But what I'm doing lately is I'll share it in my newsletter, which is usually just a headline, a quick summary, and a link. If it performs well in terms of clicks, right? If it gets, I think the number I've roughly been thinking about is like, if it gets 350 or more clicks, that signals to me there's interest in, now they haven't consumed it. They've just seen a headline and summary, right? But something about that headline and summary resonated that 350 people clicked it. So now I'm going to go turn that into a tweet. And it's not going to be a tweet that is the actual, I'm going to use some of that same copy because I know that resonated with people. I'm not going to, for the most part, link to the video or link to the article. I'm going to create basically probably a long form tweet based on what was in that piece of content.
Yeah.
If that tweet performs well, so newsletter is week 1. Week 2, the stuff that worked in the newsletter is going to go on Twitter as mostly long form tweets. If that tweet does well, then it's going to go on LinkedIn. Okay. So if the LinkedIn goes well, then I'm going to add it to my website as like a blog post, right? So what winds up happening is, in theory, what you're going to see on Twitter, not only, but the majority of stuff you're going to see on Twitter is stuff that I already know based on my newsletter, people were at least interested in, right? Yeah. What you're going to see on LinkedIn, because I only post on LinkedIn once a day. On Twitter, I'll post more than that. What you're going to see on LinkedIn is stuff that's already proven on Twitter. So it's probably going to work. And if it also works on LinkedIn, I know it's worked in my newsletter, it's worked on Twitter, it's worked on LinkedIn, it's worth adding to my website. Yeah.
That's super cool. Yeah, because you are starting from like, I mean, you are proving the content that is interesting, right? So it's proven here, it's proven here, proven here, proven here. At the end, as you said, like you end up with something that people want, which is the ultimate thing that a lot of people don't think too much about when they create content. It's like, I feel like this could work, but you don't have any signal or any indication that it could. In your case, you have it because you have the clicks on the newsletter, you have the likes on Twitter or the replies or whatever. So I think that's,
and so so that's one piece of it. And then the other thing that I started doing recently is, so in my podcast, for most episodes, people come on and ask me questions and I give them advice, and then it goes on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. Anyone's listening to this, by the way, the name of my podcast is I Want to Know. So I get the questions in advance. People come on, they ask me 3 questions. I think about what I want to say to them. I take some notes. Again, this has evolved over time, right? In the beginning, it was very much like I jot down some notes and we get on and I just sort of wing it, right? Yeah. Then I realized, well, I know for each of my answers, some part of that answer is going to be a YouTube clip. So why don't I get a little more specific and map out like what I want the YouTube clip to be, right? Because I know in advance. So now in my notes, I have a section where I'm like, okay, this is going to be, and literally on the podcast, even though a lot of it is sort of live interaction and whatever, there's going to be a point in there where I'll be like, I was thinking about your question and I put together, here's 5 ways you can improve your newsletter page, right? Which in my own mind, I'm doing an intro for a YouTube video, right? And I know that's going to be a clip. Well, so after doing that for a while, what I realized, what I used to do is the podcast would come out, the YouTube video would come out, and I'd share that YouTube video, 5 ways that you can do whatever. But now I realized, well, I'm already doing the notes of those 5 ways to do something.
That's content too.
Let me go post it on Twitter first. And what's interesting is I've realized the process of taking those sort of general notes and writing it as usually a long form tweet makes my answer better, because I'm no longer, I'm like, as I write it as a tweet, I think of some other things, whatever. The other thing is that tweet, I don't even reference the podcast. I just put it out as a standalone tweet, like 5 ways to do whatever. And I start to see how it resonates with people before I've even recorded the podcast. The guest doesn't even know really that I'm doing this, right? So what's interesting is the order in which you do things, right? And shifting from, I'm going to record this podcast, then I'm going to get the clip, then I'll go share it, then I'll, do whatever, and going, no, I can take this idea and I can put it out there first, help clarify it for myself, see how people respond, see if there's questions, see if there's things that particularly resonate with them. And then when I'm recording it, and incorporate that into it and make those adjustments. And the other thing that I've now done, again, every one of these is sort of step by step, right? Like I do a thing and then I'm like, oh, and then I could do that. And then I could do that. And then I could do that. So now when I share those tweets, at the bottom of the tweet, so it'll be like, here's 5 ways to improve your newsletter or whatever. At the bottom of the tweet, I'll say, oh, by the way, I'm talking about this in more depth in an upcoming episode of my podcast. So now those tweets are pre-promotion for, go subscribe to my podcast so you don't miss it. And it's something that sort of I just started doing in the past month or so, but way more strategic. To me, it's like it's repurposing stuff, which I've always done, but now I'm starting to get even more strategic about how I repurpose stuff.
Yeah, it's super cool because at the end you are building like some sort of ecosystem which every piece of content is really linked to each other, and it builds towards like your brand in general and your newsletter and your podcast, which is super. I mean, I think this is super smart, but it's cool that at the same time it's a process that you are figuring out with time as you do things. It's not something that you sit down one afternoon and like map everything out. It's just like you do it by learning from it and seeing,
and you iterate. You iterate as you go. And I think also some of it came from, and I think I had posted this tweet. I don't know if it was a reply to someone or a tweet, whatever, but I had said, if you think about it, every single piece of content that you post, every individual tweet, everything, there really should be a reason why you're posting it, or something that you want people to do beyond just like, okay, I want to provide value to people and I want to help them, whatever. But what do you want the person who sees it and goes, that's really helpful, that's valuable, I like, whatever. What do you actually want them to do? And there really should be, ideally, you should be optimizing for a single action on every post. Doesn't have to be the same action, but like, if you think about a tweet where you're like, okay, I have this idea to share, I think it's going to help people. Well, what do I want them to do? Do I want them to share this tweet? Do I want them to reply to this tweet? Do I want them to get my newsletter? Do I want them to get my podcast? Do I want them to be aware of something? Do I want them? And I think just that process, like if you literally stop yourself or look at every single tweet that you're going to post and go, okay, what do I want the people that read this and like it and find it valuable? What do I want them to do? And then how do I optimize for it? And that's what led me to, I'm sharing this thing. What do I want them to do? I want them to check out my podcast or subscribe to my podcast. Well, I'm going to add that thing at the end that's, blah, 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 right? When I share stuff now that was originally featured in my newsletter and worked well, when I post that tweet at the bottom, I'll say, by the way, this was originally featured in my newsletter, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not 100% with this, but I'm getting close. Almost every one of my tweets now has some sort of clear action at the bottom, at the end of it. And it's not just the automated slap on the subscribe to my newsletter thing, right? Like it's more tailored, right? Maybe I want replies. And so there's a question at the end, like picking the one thing and optimizing for it can make a big difference on your content.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. And at the same time, it also like gives you a bit more clarity when you are writing even, like, because that you need to take that piece of content into like this specific direction. So I will write this way, not this way. Like I will format it this way or this other way. So I think that's a really smart thing that everyone should do. And most of us don't. We just like, okay, we're just going to post this like valuable thing. But at the same time, it needs to have like some sort of return for me beyond.
Like, and if you don't know, what's interesting too is if you're sharing something and you go, well, I don't really know what I want people to do. Well, then why are you posting it?
Yeah.
Right. Like it's great. It's great to provide value. I'm all for providing value. But if you don't have anything that you want people to do, you're just, it's funny. I call it like random acts of content, right? There's a lot of people that are just like randomly throwing content out there, and some of it may be good, but then they wonder why, they like, well, I don't understand why I'm not getting customers. I'm not getting clients. I'm not, growing my audience, whatever. It's like, well, are you optimizing for those things? Or are you just throwing stuff out there and hoping that like people magically connect the dots? Because they will not, and this isn't a knock on anyone, but like they will not magically connect the dots.
No,
you
no, no.
know, they don't know
You
what
need,
you're doing or what
you
you want
need,
them to do
yeah, you
unless
need
you
to
tell
make
them.
them make it really easy for them to do that.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, for your first the last part of the interview, I want to talk a bit more about like the monetization part of it,
Mhm.
because you are doing actually this the week that we are recording this when the podcast airs, it won't be, but the week that we are doing this, you are doing like I would say like a pretty big change to like your one of
Mhm.
I would say like your core offer, like your
Yep.
skill sessions, because you are taking it, you are almost doubling the price, and at the same time you are stopping to sell like them individually, because just for context for people who don't know what we are talking about, like you do like let's say like a monthly or bi-monthly masterclass on like a specific topic that your
Mhm.
audience does, like it's like a 1 hour and a half workshop, um, and people can either buy them individually for 25 or $50 depending on if you do a
Mhm.
discount, or they can sign for the whole year and they get it for like I think up until now it was like $197, right?
Yeah.
But now you said I won't sell anymore individually, and I will raise the price to $350. So can you explain a bit the why you are doing that? Because I think that's a really really interesting move. Because from the outside, my assumption
Mhm.
was like it's pretty cool that you sell them individually, because I figure that there is a lot of people that actually buy them. I'm one of those. I
Mhm.
actually bought 3 or 4, and finally today, actually, I subscribed to the yearly thing before you raise the price.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to understand like what's the thinking behind this.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for joining.
Yeah,
You're
of course.
exactly the kind of person I want in there. I think you'll hopefully find it really
Yeah.
helpful. So yeah, so my skill sessions, I've done them for a few years now.
Mm.
And again, another thing like we're talking about, there's definitely a trend here where it's like everything evolves as it goes, right? So it started with the
Yeah.
idea that once every 2 months, like you said, I would do one of these sessions on a particular topic. So, like how to get clients, how to create a product in a day, how to grow your newsletter, how to define your niche, like that kind of stuff. And originally it was like, okay, you can buy them individually or for $50. And a lot of times the first week they came out, I'd make it
Mm.
25. Or you can get an annual membership, which originally was started at I think 120 and then went to 150 and then went to 197 and is now going to go to 350. The annual membership gets you all the sessions I've done before, which at this point, I think there's like 13 or so in there.
Mm.
And you get to join all the new ones over the year. So 6 a year.
Yeah.
You get to vote on the topics. So for each one, I send members sort of here's 3 things I'm thinking about. Which one do you want? So it ensures that I'm doing stuff that people want to learn. You
Yeah.
get to attend live if you want to. I record them on Zoom. You can ask questions there, that kind of stuff. So that's sort of where it started.
Mm.
Then about 6 or 8 months ago, I added what I call jam sessions, which is basically a monthly group coaching call, right?
Cool.
So every month, you can log in, you can send me my questions in advance if you can't join live, and literally just help people with their specific things. I've done things like reviews of sales pages and sign up pages, and
Nice.
people have questions about all sorts of stuff. And the reason I started them was I found that there's a lot of ways that I could help members that maybe didn't warrant a full session, right? And so this was a way where it's like, oh, a 5 or 10 minute conversation with me like could be super helpful to them, or
Mm.
just having me look at like their landing page and say, oh, you might want to do X, Y, and Z. So that has really added a lot to the sort of sessions membership that wasn't there initially. The other thing I started to do is I'm starting to add some guest sessions from people that are
Nice.
experts in stuff that I am not, right? So the first one we did, we had Christina Nicholson come in and she did a session called The Podcast Booker on how to get booked as a guest on podcasts. She's a PR expert.
Mm.
Just the next one, Justin Moore is coming in and he's going to do something on how to pitch sponsors.
Nice.
So that kind of stuff where it's like, that's not my wheelhouse,
Yeah.
but
There's.
I'm bringing in people that I know and respect are really good and doing that. So we're probably going to do 3 or 4 of those a year. Again, all this is part of the same membership. So on the one hand, the price is going up because there's a
You're
lot
doing
more
more
in
things.
there than there was, right? When I started out, it's like you were joining and there were a couple sessions in the archives and you were going to get the new ones. Now you're getting 13 existing sessions. You're getting monthly coaching calls. You're getting guest sessions. Like there's a lot more.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, there's a couple things. So one is I've sort of shifted my I don't want to say my niche, but sort of my ideal audience, right? Whereas I used to talk about creators and entrepreneurs and creative entrepreneurs and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Now I'm really focused on what I'm calling experts, right? And it's people that are, some of them are creators, some of them are entrepreneurs, but they have businesses, they're monetizing their expertise in some way, right?
Yeah.
They're teaching, they're coaching, they're consulting, they're whatever. So along with that, I'm going a little up market, right? Like if you have an expert business, like there's more money at stake. You're making more money. You're probably not just starting out. Again, this is my kind of ideal audience. So they can afford more. Price in some ways is brand, right? $350
Yeah. Totally.
sounds more about right. And to be honest, I actually think 350 is still probably low for what people are getting.
Yeah. Likely.
Right. So, but I was like, okay, I'm going to go to that. The other thing that I realized is, along with that, I would sell a lot of the individual courses, and people would upgrade at times into memberships and all that kind of stuff. But I realized, when I was looking at it, I was like, look, I really want the membership. I actually think it's best for people. They're getting, again, the coaching and all the other kind of stuff. And some of this is an experiment, right? In my own mind, I'm like, the theory is if I remove the individual option, the people that really want it will become members.
Yeah.
And will that make up for the loss of revenue on the individual sales? I don't know. It's a calculated bet or guess that I'm making.
Yeah.
The other thing is, at any point, if I decide to switch, I can always, it's very easy for me to turn the switch back on. And I may, I don't know, but maybe once a year I open it up and go, hey, you can get them all individually for a week, right? Urgency is a very powerful motivator, right? So as opposed to leaving it open-ended, so that's where I'm going, and I think I like the idea of, this is for people sort of at a certain level and willing to make a sort of investment. I had somebody who was a member, and their membership, they were at maybe $150 a year was when they had come in, and their membership was going to renew. And I always send people a reminder and say, let me know if you want to cancel or whatever. By the way, like I haven't looked recently, but it's like 85 or 90% of people renew. So that's the other thing. I feel confident about it.
Yeah.
But this person, I guess, didn't see it, whatever. And so one morning I got an email from her, or actually I got like 4 emails from her in like a total panic. And she was like, my thing renewed and I got charged another $150 and I need that money for bills. And is there any way I can get a refund, and blah, 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 which is totally fine. Like, of course, as soon as I saw it, I gave her a refund and whatever. But it's indicative of, I don't want people that their business, their money is that tight.
Yeah.
That, $150, like, honestly, like you probably shouldn't be a member if it's that, like your money's probably better spent elsewhere. Right. So I think all of this is sort of, the combination of more value, more stuff in this membership, the shift to like, this is really for experts and I want to serve experts. All of it sort of is indicative of, the person that's like going to buy one thing for $25 is fine. Like I appreciate all of it, but it's really for the people that are like, what, for $350, I'm in this and now I get all this other stuff and it's the best, it's the best way for me to serve them, best way for them to get value out of it and all of that. And then obviously the price increase, as because you just did it, every time you do a price increase, it creates massive urgency. And, the last time, I think it was in May, maybe, that I went from like 150 to 197, and I added, my annual membership grew by almost 50% in that week.
Wow.
Right. And so we'll see, I'm 2 days in now to the deadline. And usually most people come, as you can imagine, like the
last day,
the last day. So we'll see. But my hunch is that, there's going to be a jump. But so that's the thinking behind it. But like everything, it's an experiment.
Yeah, no, I think it's a cool one, and as you said, you can always like switch on the button
Mhm.
again of okay, I will sell them individually again if you see that it's good. But I never thought about those individual sessions actually maybe cannibalizing some of the subscription revenue, because some people are like, yeah, sure, I just buy it individually for $25 and I will do that every 2 months and that's it, and now you're kind of forcing, if you want this specific topic, then
Yeah.
you need to join for the whole thing. There's no other way to do it. So I think that's super cool. And the way that you're also thinking about more about like who is the audience that you're actually trying to target and to get,
Mhm.
I think that's an exercise that as creators we don't do very often. We just like hope everyone buys it and then I don't care
Yeah.
if so I think that exercise is also something really valuable and that people should do, but at the same time maybe it's something for someone who's a bit more, the business is a bit more mature. That's your case, you've been doing the skill sessions for 2 years
Yeah.
now, and so on. But again, I think that's super.
Yeah, and you'll see because
Yeah.
this isn't actually listed on there yet because I didn't want to confuse the messaging and we just recorded it and just put it up there. But the newest session is called the expert positioner, and it's
Mm.
really about how you position your expertise in the market. And it goes into exactly sort of how I wound up sort of shifting to experts and I think you'll probably find it really helpful because it's
Yeah.
exactly what we're talking about. And what will be interesting once I get past this sort of, hey, the price is changing and whatever, the next time I promote a skill session, I'll probably go through a similar way I promote them typically, which is a week's worth of sort of excerpts and all this kind of stuff. But what's going to be interesting is, and I'm curious to see how it plays out, is I've always done that sort of promoting the individual sale and going, hey, if you buy
Mm.
it, you can then get the membership. Now I'm going to be promoting this thing and going, yeah, it's for
Mm.
members. So it will be interesting to see if how many fewer, or do I get the same number of sales, like
Yeah.
what the difference will be with the exact same kind of promotional thing. The other thing that I literally have not done yet, but was just thinking about this morning and think I'm going to start doing is once I sort of get past this, like, okay, we made the price change, we're into the sort of new reality, whatever, right? I'm going to start adding to my newsletter, the weekly edition, the Sunday one, I think a section that is something along the lines of like, what's happening in skill sessions this week
Yeah. Yeah.
and telling, not just promoting them, because I've done that before. Like I've promoted, I've had all the time, I promote them, whatever, but actually starting to sort of share almost like behind the scenes stories, right? Of like, oh, this week, so for
Mm.
example, before it might have been like, oh, I'm working on putting together the expert positioner. And as I was thinking about it, I learned that I'm going to have this section about this and sort of giving like little mini lessons within
Yeah.
that, right? Or in our jam session this week, such and such member asked me a question about how to do this. I thought it was a great question. Here's what I said to them. So that in my newsletter, you're having this
Mm.
section that literally, this goes back to the repetition. Every week, people are seeing, oh, look at
Yeah.
this thing that is happening, as opposed to just a typical like, what most people do, right? Which is a
Yeah.
boilerplate for their product. And
Yeah.
it's like, when you're ready, get my skill sessions to blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, which I don't think is that effective actually. So I think
Yeah,
it's
I
better
agree.
to do it the way that you do it, just like actually showing the value that's inside. Like
Yeah. And try to
this.
create this ongoing narrative so people feel like, oh, wow, like there's all this stuff,
Yeah,
that repetition is so powerful.
yeah. Okay, this was awesome, and we are actually kind of running out of time. So
Yep.
this was super helpful. And for me, I'm already like I have like my notes here. Luckily,
Awesome.
I have the recording. But so yeah, where can people? I mean, we already pretty much covered everything that you do. But if you want to give like a final
Yeah.
reminder of like where can people find you, your newsletter, your products,
Yep.
etc. So the floor is yours.
JoshSpector.com has everything. The newsletters for theinterested.com/subscribe. My podcast is called I Want to Know. You can learn more about the skill sessions and join at joshspector.com/sessions. And I'm pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn. Twitter is at JSpector. LinkedIn, I think, is that Josh Spector. Yeah, and I have a YouTube channel as well where I share full episodes of the podcast and highlights and all of that. And I will say, if you check out all the stuff, you will start to see the patterns of how,
Yeah,
of
exactly.
how stuff works. Because I do think even though I'm continually like learning and doing new things, like I'm pretty good at the sort of repurposing and maximizing the value of stuff I create, which I think, one of my big takes is that most people don't get nearly the value they should out of the content they create. And I think there's a lot, I get a lot out of it, and I still feel like I've barely scratched the surface on what I could be getting out of it. So if that interests you, hit me up.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks a bunch, Josh, for being here, and see you everyone on the next one.
Cool. Thanks, Alex.